Network Security Basics, episode 2.
Correct. How did you find episode 1?
Do you know what, Isaac? I found it really interesting. You gave that example of, what would you do if you found a USB drive on the street? So it just makes you think that, security is everyone's responsibility. And it made me think about what I would do in that situation. So what are we talking about today, Isaac?
It's going to be about, we're going to start with a continuation of what we've talked about previously. And that is the topic of risk. When we talk of the powers that be in the decision chain, people are not always as fascinated as speeds and feeds as what we may think, right? They want to know how securing a network is going to help them with things like regulatory frameworks. How can the solutions that we offer help them to comply with regulations so they don't fall foul of it. So it's quite a big topic, but it's not going to be the only topic.
That's it.
No, that's not it. There's more, definitely more topics as well, but you're going to have to watch the episode to find out more.
Right, let's get on with it.
In episode 1, we covered the topic of responsibility in security, and we also had a look at the foundation of a lot of security frameworks, which is commonly known as the CIA security principles or the CIA triad. And remember, this has actually got nothing to do with that CIA that you're thinking about. If you have a look on this graph on screen, you'll see a really simplistic graphic that tries to illustrate the issue of risk versus impact. Everyone would like to have all their eggs in this basket right here. Low risk, low probability, which of course equals low risk overall. It's not always that easy though. Patents, inventions, competitor information, intellectual property, they're always going to have a high impact on the business if they fall into competitor hands, for example. So we then need to figure out what the risk levels are for these different combinations of probability versus impact metrics. I can't tell you what they are. You have to do an exercise for your assets and figure it out because everyone and every organization is totally different. So here are 5 terms that are going to help us define risk. Firstly, asset. An asset is anything of value that is owned by an organization, both tangible, such as information systems and physical property, and intangible assets, like intellectual property. Vulnerability is something, software, hardware, human weaknesses even, that will give an attacker unauthorized access to resources in an organization. And examples could be things like unneeded services running, on a server, shut it down, very bad. Applications or operating systems that are missing a patch, also not good at all, fix it. Open port on a firewall. Remember the talk about improper configuration in episode 1 regarding firewalls? Lacks a lazy physical security. Don't let it happen. Just don't. Then what about threat? Threat is any potential danger to information systems. An entity that will use a particular vulnerability against the company or an individual. The entity that takes advantage of the vulnerability is called the threat agent. Sometimes we'll refer to them as hackers. Some examples would be an intruder accessing the network through a port on the firewall, processors accessing data in the way that violates the security policy, employees making an unintentional mistake, and this happens all the time. The next term is exposure. Exposure is an instance of being exposed to losses from a threat agent, a hacker. A vulnerability exposes an organization to possible damages, right? Again, an example would be password, where you have password management that's poor and no password rules are enforced. Bottom line, user passwords can be captured and used for unauthorized access. Tighten that up. company doesn't have its wiring inspected and does not put proactive fire prevention into place, it exposes to potential fire. It doesn't all have to be about IT and IT systems. A fire could bring down your IT systems and destroy information. Finally, countermeasure or safeguard, right? This is something that is put in place to mitigate, to reduce a potential risk. Some examples of this mitigation could be software configuration, a hardware device like a firewall, a procedure that eliminates a vulnerability, such as firmware or OS updates, strong password management, implementation of BIOS password, very important, disabling USB port functionality, remember in episode 1, security awareness training, so important. So here's an example of how we can put all of these 5 points into a sentence that makes sense and that we can all wrap our heads around, including me. A company has antivirus software installed, but they don't keep the virus signatures updated. This is a vulnerability. It is vulnerable to a virus attack. The threat is that a virus will show up in the environment and disrupt productivity. The likelihood of a virus showing up in the environment and causing damage is the risk. That's the risk. The countermeasures for this company is to obviously update the signature files. Applying the right countermeasure can eliminate that vulnerability and exposure and reduce the risk. It could be that you cannot eliminate the threat agent, the hacker, or you don't use computers. I mean, it's possible. But the company or organization can protect itself and prevent the threat agent from exploring the vulnerability by implementing something like security awareness training. That's pretty good, right? One whole sentence that covers all those terms. So what can companies do to minimize risk? I thought you'd never ask. Right. So when whatever risk is identified within a company related to cybersecurity, it will always be subject to management's attitude towards risk and the cost factor in mitigating risk. If you're an IT person, never forget that. The options organizations can take to mitigate risk are generally split into 4 categories. First one is risk avoidance. This is the attempt to eliminate the risk entirely, kind of like that company back in South Africa. They wanted to eliminate all possible risk in their network. It could manifest itself in an organization deciding to stop an activity entirely when a potential impact of a given risk is too high. A good example of this is where war, for example, forces organizations to exit a country due to the extremely high risk to the employees. The next one is risk acceptance. No action is taken to reduce the risk, which is a very valid option in many cases. So what if they hack into my 1985 printer? Good luck to them. The impact or the likelihood of this occurring often is negligible. I don't have to do anything. The third strategy is risk mitigation. This is where organizations, they take actions to prevent or to reduce the possibility of a risk event. They do this by implementing remediation controls and by establishing policies and procedures. This is the type of risk action that really impacts an organization's ability to stay afloat or to survive a cyber attack and come out smelling like roses. And finally, on the topic of risk, the most common type of risk management is, any takers out there? Got a piece of paper and pen at hand? What do you think it is? If you wrote down risk transfer, then give yourself 10 seconds of applause. This is the process of passing the risk to another party, generally speaking, an insurance company, for a fee. But when this happens, the one thing you can almost certainly count on is that they will do a risk assessment and force you to implement some policies and procedures like MFA and PAM before they will take you on as a client. Then there's something else you need to be aware of, and that is just because you took the route of transferring the risk to an insurance company doesn't let you off the hook of making sure that you implement everything they document that you need to do. You can't ignore antivirus update or patching, operating system updates and vulnerabilities, updating firmware, etc. They take on the risk if everything is done as it should be and you still suffer a zero-day exploit, for example. But they will not cover you if you are lazy and you don't do the right things. We covered a lot in this episode, all related to risk. It's really important stuff because when you stand in front of a customer, when you want to set up that meeting with a customer, you need to understand that the topic of risk is on someone's mind in that organization. It might not be the IT manager, it might not be the networking guy, but higher up the chain, there is somebody there in that organization that is going to be responsible for managing risk. And if you understand these concepts and terminology, if you understand why risk is such an important concept in organizations, then you can really confidently have that conversation with them. You can confidently engage with them and not feel like you have no idea what these people are talking about. I hope you found that information useful. Use it. Now, let's get down to some lighter concepts that are much more fun to explain, but which seem to cause a little bit of confusion for many people. Now we should be in a place to understand how understanding risk is beneficial to companies in the network security space. But so what, I hear you say. I understand risk. What's the big deal? This is where everything that I've said and that we've just covered starts to become real. This is the stuff that keeps CSOs and CISOs and CTOs up at night. The impact of not being compliant. We'll go through a number of them. We'll try and do it as quickly as possible, but as clearly as possible. Again, remember, you don't have to memorize this stuff. You can always come back to this content and we'll have it right at the end of the episode. But just try, as I'm talking these things through, to see in your mind, where you might have come across this before, maybe in the news, maybe, some or other computer article that you've come across. So number one, financial penalties. One of the most immediate and tangible consequences of non-compliance is your bottom line. These fines can be crippling for business, especially small or medium-sized enterprise. As an example, in the USA, HIPAA penalties can range from $100, not a lot given, to $50,000 per violation or per record, with a maximum annual penalty of $1.5 million. GDPR fines can go up to 20 million euros, or 4% of global annual revenue, whichever is greater. That's a lot of euros. Legal consequences. Non-compliance can result in lawsuits, government action, regulatory investigations. In some cases, executives or employees may face criminal charges themselves if non-compliance involves intentional negligence or fraud. Then there's reputational damage. Non-compliance and the subsequent data breaches or legal penalties can really damage a company's reputation. Some companies never recover. Published breaches or fines often lead to a loss of customer trust, right? Customers just don't trust those companies anymore. And that leads to decreased revenue and long-term business harm. Business disruption. Organizations that fail to comply with security protocols, they may suffer cyber attacks, as we've been speaking this whole time. They may suffer data breaches or other incidents that disrupt operations. For example, a ransomware attack on a legal firm that's not following proper security protocols. This could really lead to extended downtime and the complete loss of critical data. What about loss of customers and partners? Companies that do not comply with data protection laws can lose customers who no longer feel that their data is safe. I don't want to deal with these companies. Partners, vendors, or clients may also choose to terminate business relationships due to non-compliance because they also fear a lack of security or legal risk. Then there's the issue of civil liability. In addition to government-imposed fines, businesses that experience data breaches due to non-compliance may face civil lawsuits from affected customers, from patients, or from other parties whose information was compromised. These lawsuits, they can result in very costly settlements. What about criminal charges? In severe cases, especially where non-compliance involves gross negligence or fraudulent activities, individuals responsible for non-compliance may face criminal charges, and these could include imprisonment, loss of certification or accreditation in industries such as healthcare or finance. If you fail to comply with specific laws and standards, this could lead to the loss of certifications or accreditations that further restrict your ability as an organization to operate. So there's a lot of information over here. The risks of ignoring risk, the risks of not doing anything to protect your network from these vulnerabilities is very, very high. Can you as an organization afford to take the risks? Maybe not. Maybe we need to look at all of that again. But this is the stuff that keeps people up at night. Now, let's get down to some lighter concepts that are much more fun to explain, but which seem to cause a little bit of confusion for many people. So next up, we'll talk about IDS, Intrusion Detection Systems, and IPS, very similar, Intrusion Prevention Systems. IDS is a monitoring system that identifies suspicious activities or potential threats in network traffic, and it does this by analyzing network packets or system activity for known attack vectors or patterns or unusual behavior. But it's passive. When IDS detects something potentially harmful, it generates an alert to notify security administrators, but it doesn't take any action to block or stop the threat. SolarWinds, Spiceworks, those are just two names of popular software, and people should be familiar with those. Intrusion Prevention Systems, IPS, on the other hand, is similar to IDS, but it also includes preventative capabilities. So it actively monitors network traffic, and it can automatically take action when a threat is detected. When IPS detects a malicious attempt to access a system, it can block the traffic or shut down the connection to prevent the attack from succeeding. A good analogy would be, for IDS, would be a security alarm that notifies you if someone tries to break into your house, but it doesn't stop the intruder. IPS is like an alarm system that not only notifies you, but also locks all the doors and windows to prevent the intruder from getting in. How about the topic of encryption and decryption? Ooh, this is now sounding saucy, I hear you say. How would you like anyone within a wireless network that you're on be able to see the passwords or the access code to your online bank account? Some of you watching will be like, dude, good luck to them because there's nothing in my bank account for them to take anyway. But in most instances, the answer will be a resounding absolutely no way. Well, a lot of people feel the same way. And that's why you get an HTTPS connection in your browser's address bar instead of just HTTP when you connect to your bank. I hope that in my lifetime, I'll see the elimination of HTTP because honestly, all web traffic should be encrypted. But how does it work? Well, on this diagram in screen, you see the example of a symmetrical algorithm used to encrypt data. Imagine you and a friend have the same key to a locked box. You can both use that same key to lock and unlock the box, but you must make sure that no one else gets a copy of the key. Then you get a symmetrical algorithm. And in this case, there isn't just one key, there are two keys. But one of the keys is a publicly available key that anyone can have access to. But the second key is a private key. Sound confusing? It's a little bit, because it's difficult for us to relate it to something real that we can touch and use in a practical way every day. I mean, who uses a publicly available key to put mail into a postbox so that we can use our private keys to get access to that postbox, right? But don't let these terms or technology frighten you or chase you away from engaging. And there's a lot of them, right? These technologies, these descriptions and explanations are the language of network security, just like the language that you speak every single day. If you want the things you say to make sense to people in the network security world, you must learn to speak the language. Remember, ChatGPT, Copilot, and many other tools are there to really help you to understand a lot more when you need it.
That's a lot of information there, but don't forget to watch right to the end and there'll be a summary of all the information that you've heard in this episode.
Yeah, you can also scan the QR code and it will automatically send us an email with the specific code, and we'll respond to you and send you a PDF of the summary. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.